Young royals marrying regular people, in many cases making the monarchy perhaps seem a little bit more accessible. But in doing so, is the notion of royalty being lost? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. A royal relationship between a prince or princess and a civilian, once almost unheard of, not totally, we'll go into that. It is now a much more regular occurrence. But what does that mean for monarchy per se, what it stands for and how it presents itself to the world?
It's what fairy tales are made of. A royal meets and falls for a regular member of the public. Meghan Markle, soon to be a duchess, had a normal upbringing in America. She's an actress and already well known, so the spotlight is nothing new. But how will she fit into royal life? Are so-called commoners like Meghan Markle changing the face of the world's monarchies? An American actress and divorcee with no royal experience.
Hi, I'm Rachel Zane. I'll be giving you your orientation.
Congratulations!
Meghan Markle and Prince Harry represent Britain's modern monarchy, where a good love match means more than an elite bloodline. Some see their engagement as a turning point.
That wouldn't have happened 50 years ago. It wouldn't. Divorced, black, American, no. So times are changing.
Attitudes in the House of Windsor have moved on since King Edward VIII caused a scandal with his choice of bride. He abdicated the throne in 1936 to wed American socialite and divorcee Wallis Simpson.
A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor.
Grace Kelly is perhaps the most famous and glamorous actress to wed a royal, giving up a successful career for Monaco's Prince Rainier in 1956. Natasha Alieva was a hotel maid from Belarus. She married a sheikh from the Dubai royal family. Even Britain's Kate Middleton lived a somewhat ordinary life as an accessories buyer for a retailer before marrying Prince William. In Japan, the royals maintain their traditions, and Princess Mako is giving up her title to marry a commoner for love. With young princes and princesses choosing partners outside of royal bloodlines, are they slowly changing the very nature of monarchy? By making them more accessible and perhaps most importantly more marketable? Or is the notion of royalty being diluted and soon to be irrelevant to the modern world?
With me at today's round table, we have the historian Anna Whitelock, author of The Queen's Bed, an intimate history of the Queen's Court. We have the royal author and journalist Claudia Joseph. She's written Kate, the Making of a Princess, and Thomas Mace Archer Mills, the chairman of the British Monarchist Society and Foundation. Warm welcome to every one of you. Claudia, shortly after the engagement was announced, you said it's extraordinary how far we've come since the 1930s. It's changed beyond all recognition. And clearly we're referring simply to the British monarchy. In what way has it changed?
Well, if you look at what happened with Edward VIII, I mean, he was not allowed to marry a divorced American woman, and now we see Prince Harry, 70 years later, 80 years later, having chosen not only an American and an actress, which you know, wouldn't have been allowed either, but she's divorced and she's Afro-American. So
that is an obvious change, but in the way the monarchy is perceived or the way that it works itself, how else has it changed?
Well, I think they're much more accessible, aren't they, the royals, than they were in previous eras. The Queen, I think, has got the balance right. I mean, she is accessible, but she's not one of us. I mean, William and Harry have been educated at school as opposed to with governesses. They've been to university, and they have a lot of friends in the real world, and obviously Prince William is married to a commoner, and you know, has lived in a flat in university. He's got friends, he's had parties, he's You know, they've done everything that we all would have done.
See, I'm fascinated by the fact you said the Queen's got the balance right, but is the Queen worried about where it's going?
Well, I think it's also important to say that, of course, Edward VIII was king at the time he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, and she was divorced and actually still married and divorcing. So I think we're looking at a quite different situation. I mean, Prince Harry is 5th in line to the throne, soon to be 6th in line to the throne when the new royal baby's born. So, I mean, it's a very, very different prospect. I mean, I think even if, you know, Prince Charles was thinking about marrying, I mean, indeed, when he married Camilla, the Queen didn't attend that wedding, she attended the blessing. So I think we have to be quite careful that we don't draw direct parallels between, you know, King Edward VIII and Prince Harry.
But do you think the Queen's worried about does she lose sleep over it?
I think the Queen is, first of all, I think the Queen, in relation to Harry and William, acts as a grandmother. I mean, I think she clearly was there very much looking and protecting them at the time of Diana's death. So I think we have to think that the Queen is acting as a grandmother. She sees that Harry is happy and settled, and I think, you know, we shouldn't disregard that kind of human instinct. I think also, you know, I think it was quite interesting in that first engagement interview that that Harry and Meghan gave, that, you know, they were talking very on message, they were talking very strategically. The fact that they talked about the Commonwealth, I think, was a really savvy move, because they're talking about carving out for themselves a sort of niche role which will actually support the monarchy and the royal family. So I don't think the Queen, I mean, who knows, but I can't imagine that the idea that Meghan is, you know, is mixed race, is an actress. I mean, she would definitely have had very wise conversations with Harry about what Meghan's letting herself in for, but I don't think she's losing sleep massively over it.
Do you think it's changed for the better or the worse?
I think it has changed for the better. And when we look at this, the addition of Meghan Markle is the absolute treasure trove for the royal family. I mean, we can look at history and we look at how Edward VIII responded, how Wallis Simpson responded, but it's a very different world today. So when we look at a changing face of Britain, when we look at social fluidity, really, we're really now looking at a changing face of the monarchy, just as we are the changing face of Britain. And adding in an addition of someone of colour who actually owns that and is very proud of it. The Queen is a steward, number one. She's a grandmother second, and she takes her duty very, very seriously. So I think that when we look at what Her Majesty might be thinking, of course it is the survival of the institution. And change starts from the top down and stops with the person who takes over
But the danger is here, and each one of you may have an opinion on this, is Walter Bagehot in the
Quite. That's
19th century. A constitutional expert, famous writer, said, do not let the light shine in, because otherwise you're going to destroy it all.
I think this is exactly the problem. I mean, I think when we say, you know, what's good for the monarchy is one thing, but when we talk about, you know, the monarchy moving on and reflecting the times, you know, the monarchy is an anachronistic institution. You know, the idea of having this strict hierarchy in a world where, you know, privilege and not being, you know, born into a role rather than earning it through merit is very much at odds with society. So, you know, I think it's very striking when we sort of applaud the fact that William and Harry are somehow like us, and, you know, Prince William, you know, shops at Waitrose, and he puts Prince George when he was born into the car like any other new dad. This is all very well.
He did too, didn't he? Because he was fumbling with all of the seatbelts like we've all done.
You know, and this is great, but there will come a moment when William is crowned king. And I think what part of the problem in all of these discussions that we have at the moment is that we haven't had a coronation for most of our living memory, even in our lifetime. And so the reality of what the monarchy actually is hasn't been in our faces, and it just seems like a kind of nice celebrity family. But the monarchy is fundamentally premised from the top on the notion that in the coronation, but in the anointing, that the monarch is stood above the rest of us.
Yes.
So in making it more ordinary, as we are ordinary, are we in danger of doing what Bagehot said and destroying what
think,
it is?
I think very much in danger. That's why I said that I thought the Queen had got the balance right, because I think that William and Harry are very keen to be popular, and that they have sort of got very confused as to what their roles are. I think one of the classic examples were the photographs of Kate sunbathing in the south of France. You know, William went ballistic about it. He got the lawyers in, but in the south of France, of course, they're just celebrities. They don't care that we have a royal family. They're not interested. They're lovely pictures of the Duchess of Cambridge, sunbathing topless. They'll make a fortune for the photographer, and that's what they think about. And I think William has to accept that, you know, he may have a very sheltered life, and they have a gentleman's agreement with the press, or have growing up. Obviously, it's not so strict as it was, but I mean, I think he has to accept that, you know, in this country, you know, he is in a very powerful position, but in other countries, he's a celebrity.
Let's talk about the changing role of what's expected of a royal in a moment. But Thomas, let me ask you about this. If the light is shone upon the monarchy, why is it going to go wrong? Or why could it go wrong? In other words, if they come across as more accessible, ordinary people, where's the danger?
To a point, and there's a fine line between being royal and being celebrity. And when we shine the light in, we lose a bit of that mystery, that mystique. We lose the special brand of magic that is monarchy in this country. We don't want to see the inner workings. We don't want that. We want something fun and nice, something that we're putting out, something that's pomp and pageantry and shows the best of Britain. We like shiny. We like the glitz. We like the glamour. But when we get into the internal workings, and see, it's like going to Disneyland, Paris, and going through the tunnels, and you're like, well, this just takes everything out of it.
I can remember one particular occasion when somebody said, wow, that's extraordinary, we're seeing what they're like. And it was Prince Philip invited the newsreel cameras to come in and watch him cooking a picnic for the family.
Yes.
I think it was at Balmoral.
Yes,
Yes, it was.
And they were very criticised for that documentary, weren't they?
The Windsors, royal family.
I think there's also, I think, a generational question here. I mean, I think when Thomas talks about, you know, we love the kind of fun of it. I mean, when I talk to my students, my undergraduates, they, you know, they feel, first of all, they have very little opinion on the royals. And if they're if we do have a discussion about it, they feel like they do not want the royal family representing them. They feel that it's a completely anachronistic institution, and I really feel that people have the Queen belongs in many ways to a sort of bygone age. You know, the reverence of the royal body, which actually is a long-standing historical notion. I mean, it used to be that by the laying on of hands, that it was believed that the monarch could actually heal scrofula, tuberculosis. And we still have with the Queen that lingering sense of...
Is it going to go when she goes?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the international outrage, if you remember when the Australian Prime Minister put his arm around it, and indeed, I think Michelle Obama, you do not turn your back on the Queen. Now, when you think about Prince Charles, you know, we all know quite a lot about his body. His body doesn't command the kind of reverence. And I think that there's this, it's just not the same anymore. So I really feel like there's going to be big questions when the Queen dies about its usefulness and its relevance.
And the difficulty of a commoner marrying into royalty is perhaps that they don't understand the same rules that the others have all been brought up with, which is in the British monarchy's sense, you do not dabble in politics. You don't really have opinions.
Well, Prince Charles doesn't follow.
Well, this is where we're going again.
He's not king yet.
Prince Charles...
He's not king.
I know, but how can you take him seriously when he is king if he's already putting his views, you know, out there? And look at Meghan Markle. She said very clearly what she thinks of Donald Trump. Now, how is that going to sit when she's a member of the royal family? And you can't take your words back in this current era. We've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, everything's all over the internet. In previous eras, if you made a gaffe, you know, perhaps it would be in newspaper cuttings, but...
Well, we don't know what the Queen thinks about things. You know, when the Queen might have kind of like, you know, maybe even just suggested that she was, that she was very opposed to the Scottish referendum, just basically by an odd sort of sniff or a wink. It was massive news. We don't know what she thinks. And, you know, the fact is we know Charles's opinions on all kinds of things. Now, maybe there's a way in which the monarchy can evolve, and I think it's important to realise that over history, the monarchy is underpinned both by tradition but also by subtle evolution. I mean, there has always been a bit of make do and mend going on. So I think we need to, you know, coronations have had to change a little bit. Things have had to be tinkered with around the edges.
It's changing with the times, and the institution, what's special about it is that it does change. Its survival is based on change, and that's what we're seeing here.
And do other royals in different countries, because they've often married into non-royal bloodlines, quite a lot of it happening at the moment. Do other royals, do you think, have the same problems? Because their roles are entirely different, aren't they?
I think you've got to remember that the Queen was head of the Commonwealth, and she's a bigger institution than a lot of European monarchies, I think. And head of the church and head of the armed forces.
Head of state of 16 nations in total.
Exactly. And I think that gives her a certain gravitas that perhaps the other, a lot of the European monarchies went through this. Well, we saw it, Princess Grace
They're
in the
not
50s
like us.
and
See,
the Empress.
continental monarchies, they're not coronated. They're invested and inaugurated. We look at the Dutch.
Well, so help me here. What's the difference?
Well, the difference is when we look at our institution, we have a grand occasion where in front of God and the country, where we have the royal motto, Dieu est mon droit, God in my right.
It's all about the anointing.
Exactly.
It's a crucial idea.
Whereas when we look at
Anointed by
continental
God.
monarchies, yes, of course, continental monarchies don't have that. When Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands went ahead and abdicated, again, something we don't do, for her son Willem-Alexander, there wasn't a coronation.
She still
There wasn't
effectively just
anything like
resigned
that.
rather than
Yes, of
causing
course.
crisis, yes.
But it's the same now. We're looking at Japan, case in point. The first emperor ever to go ahead and say, well, I'm going to retire on this date and abdicate my throne in 2019. It's a very different composition for royal families around the world. We
should,
are an
we should
anomaly.
mention at this point that, Thomas, you're an advisor to a couple of royal houses in Europe, Serbia, I think.
Yes, I work
Albania.
closely
There
with
are
the Serbian
no
royal
kings
family,
or queens
yes,
in those countries at the moment. But
Right, de facto king and
How do
queen.
you advise?
what do you? Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
What do you advise them about?
Well, we look at recognition. We look at public support for it. We look at their charity, their giving, how they're actually re-establishing the brand within the country. And case in point, Serbia, over 70 plus years of not having a monarchy, coming out of the throes of communism, where everything was just destroyed. And then the war back in the 90s, the only thing that really could bring the people together and bring democracy back to Serbia was the king. So the government went ahead, reinstated not the royal family, but made them citizens, brought them back, letting them live in their ancestral palaces and take on certain aspects of social life, which is actually letting people rally round their king and have another purpose to come out of the dark days of communism and regain what's important to them as Serbian people.
You're either PR for them or you're a fifth columnist. And some people must see you as an insurgent trying to re-establish
I
them.
believe in constitutional monarchy.
But I think, I mean, the point that you make, I think, is an interesting one because, of course, I mean, we have seen in this country the rebranding of the monarchy from the sort of Victorian idea of a family monarchy, you know, being the kind of ultimate family. And then, of course, you know, not least in the 90s when the Queen's children were, you know, their marriages were in meltdown.
Yes.
Then, you know, that whole notion of the monarchy as being about the principal, you know, family no longer really held currency. So now what we've seen is the kind of evolution of this whole notion of the welfare monarchy, this idea about charitable work and being defined by, you know, good causes and what they do. And I think, you know, the work clearly, I mean, one of the best things to kind of engage young people is the work that, you know, William and Harry have done with mental health, with the Invictus Games, all of these kind of things. So, you know, that is important.
Are they sort of following on from Prince Albert's example of being, if you like a moral authority for the country and then setting an example to the nation as to, quotes, how it should behave?
Well, I think to a certain extent, I mean, they've been slimmed down as well. I mean, Prince Charles has made it very clear that he doesn't want his siblings and their children involved in the monarchy. I think maybe that might be a mistake because that puts the onus on them, and if things go wrong, of course, there isn't the support. I think that William and Harry are very keen to take over their mother's role to a certain extent, and I think maybe it's branding, but I think a lot of it is down to wanting to recognise their mother. I mean, we saw the television interview with them recently, which I personally think was quite a mistake.
I would agree.
They gave so
Tell
much.
us why. Tell us why.
Well,
Because
I
they
watched
just-
it. I have to say, I thought I saw two young people very much in love.
Either you want
absolutely,
the media or
but-
you don't. And I don't mean to speak over you, but please carry on.
Well, I just think that they are talking about their... I mean, it's very difficult because mental health obviously is a very important issue in this country and they are highlighting it. But to talk about their own feelings about the death of their mother and the detail... I mean, as you said earlier, we don't get that with the Queen. We don't know what the Queen thinks about anything. you know, William
That's
and
the
Harry were
mystique
no...
of it.
Exactly,
That's the
exactly.
light.
That's
And
why I
we
think
come
it's
back to the
stay.
central question.
Yes.
If you marry outside the royal family, and we were talking beforehand,
Yeah.
what, 1462, Edward IV did it, in the
It was that
1700s, you
yeah,
said.
1660, the future James II.
Yep.
And
It doesn't
and
happen very
Clyde
often in this
is the last commoner, I think, to marry into the...
If you,
well, marry a future
if you
king,
bring
not into the
commoners
royal
in,
Yeah.
us types, if you...
Well, it's not us types.
well,
though.
all
I mean,
right,
maybe it's
no.
more
They
your type.
are
It's not
that.
my type. I wouldn't be. I mean, you know, we're talking about. I think it's. I mean, William and Harry
But
have
they
a very
are.
small group of friends.
But then it can go wrong, can't
It can, but they have a small group of friends, and those friends have been a kind of conduit to these other people. And you know, Meghan was introduced to Harry by one of his very select group of
Yes.
friends. So I think, you know, this isn't about William and Harry being in a nightclub and sort of, you know, meeting some random girl there. This is, you know, it's within a kind of social milieu.
But it is accessible. I mean,
Yes.
you say it's not your life. Actually, it is my life because I was private school educated. And it's very easy if you mix in private schools to meet the royals. And,
Yeah.
you know, I went to
Yes.
parties. In fact, Helen Winsorgate crashed my brother's birthday party. So, I mean, you know, and you think...
Nobody asked her to leave.
If I actually... It was very embarrassing, but do you want the story?
Go on.
I went up to her thinking, how dare someone gate crash my brother's birthday party? So I went up and said, who are you? And she said, Helen or whatever. And I was like, who invited you? And then I went away and I felt guilty because I was like, oh, I've been really mean. So I went back and she must have thought I'd found out in between who she was and changed my mind. And I was like, but my point
You're off the
is
Christmas
that...
list.
Well, I know, it's terrible, isn't it? But my point is that, you know, there are a lot of girls, I mean, obviously not the whole population, but there are enough people that think, well, if Kate can do it or Meghan can do it, then I can do it. And George and Harry are now, okay, they're exclusive private schools, but they're all mixing, you know, in previous eras we saw, obviously, governesses, they were educated in-house, so to speak. So they weren't mingling with...
Yeah, I mean, it's
and
definitely
meeting
changed.
different
There's
people.
another side to this, though, isn't it? We've talked about perhaps the dangers of bringing in somebody from outside, but what about the bonuses, the pluses? Somebody who might be able to say to Harry, no, no, please don't put that silly uniform on. You're going to get snapped by the photographers.
And that's what she's going to do.
Yeah, so it could have a
And
plus
it
side to
will.
it.
He is a very unconventional British prince. He's lived his life his own way. He's done his royal bit his own way. So this is not a union coming that I was shocked about. I was actually rather delighted.
I know.
And said, finally, knowing what we do about her, this is directly in line with the way Prince Harry wants to live his life. He wants someone who's unconventional, who's fun, who is a little outspoken, the same that he is. And I think we're going to see wonderful things, but we cannot forget that no matter what the younger royals do, they must have Granny's seal of approval.
The time has rattled on. We are coming close to the end of the programme. So how about this for a final thought? Will it be the making of the monarchy or perhaps the start of the end of the monarchy?
I don't think Meghan's going to make or break the monarchy, that's for sure. I think that there is going to be a whole question about whether the monarchy can modernise, what that looks like, and whether it can survive in its modernisation when the Queen dies. I mean, that's going to be the big thing, because I think for a long time, the support for the monarchy has been seen as actually synonymous with support for the Queen. When you take the Queen away, the sort of, you know, the approval rating for the monarchy, I think will, you know, go massively down, because they're not one and the same thing.
So it wouldn't have mattered whether he married into a royal bloodline or whether he married
don't
Meghan
think so.
Markle or whatever.
See, we need to start educating about the pluses of the institution and what it's here for. Its constitutional foundation of what we actually live within this parliamentary democracy that we enjoy.
And the fact that they're
we
so
don't educate
yeah,
enough
they're
about
so
the monarchy.
distant from so many things. Bagehot also described this as a
Yes, he
secret
did.
republic, and perhaps that is the secret as
And
well,
in
isn't it?
Australia, they sometimes say Australia is a crowned republic. But I don't want that for this country. We need proper education about the pros and also the cons of constitutional monarchy. If we don't have it, what happens to our system? If we take the petrol out of a car, does it continue to run? It doesn't.
I mean, of course,
difficult
what we you know, what we unfortunately don't know is quite, you know, the wisdom that the Queen shares in her weekly audiences with, you know, with the Prime Minister. I mean, you know, the fact that her first Prime Minister was Churchill. You know, the Queen is the best kind of example of, you know, continuity and experience and wisdom. And I'm sure she's had a huge impact in the political life of this country in a way that we don't know.
Of course she has.
Claudia, as we come to the end, go on.
Well, I
Wrap it
was
up,
just
since
gonna
you're
say,
the only
I
one I
think-
know who's insulted a royal.
And hangs out with them.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think you've got to remember the Queen has trained William very well. He used to go to tea with her every week from Eton at Windsor Castle, and I think he is very much trying to emulate her, and I think you see that a lot with the way William and Kate behave. Harry is not going to be king. We've had Princess Margaret, we've had Prince Andrew. I mean, he's not going to be as significant anyway to the royal family. Obviously, he's a royal, but I mean, I think you have to look at Prince Charles and Prince William and see how the future lies from there.
Yeah, I suppose at the end of the day, and by the way, thank you very, very much indeed for coming on the programme. It comes down to the fact that although they've married Harry and William commoners, they are not commoners themselves.
But they bring something special.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much
Some
indeed.
glitter.
They may wear the crown, it's whether they command respect and whether those people that they decide to make part of their family do the same thing that will determine whether the institution of monarchy in this country, Britain in particular, but also worldwide perhaps, will continue into the 21st century and beyond. From me, David Foster, and my guest, thank you very much for watching Roundtable. Hope to have your company next time.